D&D number 11, Circle of Life in Jesus' Name, Part 3, Chapter 10. It is October 30th, 2:02 a.m., Wednesday morning, South Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Jordan woke when she accidentally kicked her foot and it landed hard on the bed. The pain shot through her. She grunted as she sat up, a little disoriented. She turned to look at the clock on her nightstand because she didn't have her phone. She frowned. The clock showed it was after 2 in the morning. She tried to remember what had happened. Dr. Keno had come and examined her. She'd said physically Jordan was healing well, but emotionally she was having a hard time. She said Jordan was feeling a crippling amount of fear. Dr. Keno had tried to counsel her a bit and then said she needed to speak with Grandmaster Keno. Jordan had agreed to do so. Then Dr. Keno gave Jordan a massage on her neck and shoulders and head, and that was the last thing Jordan remembered. She looked beside her to see if Eric had come back, but the bed was empty. That made her feel desperate to see him, but Dr. Keno had said he was exhausted. He probably went to eat his cake and gone to bed. After all, he had to get up and go train again early in the morning. She needed to stop being so needy and clingy. Still, even as she thought that, she felt the fear and desperation creep into her mind. And pain. Her whole leg was throbbing in pain, and the pills were downstairs. She sat up and swung her legs down to the floor, grabbed up her crutches, and headed to the bathroom. When she came out, she headed back to bed, then turned and headed to the door, then turned and headed back to the bed. She ended up pacing the room several times. She didn't want to go back to bed. She was anxious and nervous and in pain. And finally, she went to the door and stepped out into the hall. There were 2 dim night lights plugged into sockets at each end of the very long, wide hallway. Jordan made her way to the top of the wide curved staircase and looked down. She didn't dare chance it. She could fall, or at the very least get stuck down there and not be able to get back up to bed. Sighing, she looked down the hall. It was a very long hall, maybe even running the length of the home, which was a long way. Maybe, she thought, if she walked the length of the hallway a few times, she'd get tired enough to go back to bed. So she headed slowly down, trying hard to not let the crutches make noise as she placed them. Just past the staircase on the left was the room that Gabe used when he stayed here. She looked across the hall from Gabe's room to another door and went over and opened it. It was another bedroom. She went farther down the hall, maybe 20 feet or more, and came to another set of doors. On the left was another bedroom, she knew, because it was one her mother had used. Across from it, on Jordan's right, was Desi's room. And then another 20 or 30 feet down the hall was Alec's room on the right, and another bedroom on the left, the one she'd taken Alec and Desi through to watch the Kenos do their morning beach routine. Finally, there at the end of the hall was a huge, really magnificent painting. It was mostly white because it was trees lining a road, all in blossoms of white. Jordan moved closer and studied the painting. The detail of each blossom on the trees was unbelievable. She tried to see the painter's name in the bottom, but it was too dark in the hallway. However, when she looked up above the painting, she saw a brass plate that read, Spring Dogwoods in Georgia. And then on the next line, Breeze Sheridan Adams. Jordan smiled. This was an exquisite painting. One could almost feel like you could walk among the trees. Sighing, the pain shot through her again, and she turned to walk back toward her end of the hall, but decided to go in the room across from Alec's. She stepped in, turned on the light, and took note of the bedspread. It was mostly gray, a thick, quilted, possibly silk or satin bedspread. It was inviting. The bedspread in her own room was white. In Taylor's room was a light blue. In Three's room was a mixture of dark gray and rusty brown. Mrs. Keno had such good taste. To the right of the queen-size bed was another large painting. This one was more of a modern art type deal. It had mostly gray, mixed with swirls of white and some blue, and as Jordan studied it, she realized it was the ocean. But not like if one was to look out over the ocean, but as if one was in the water and a storm had brought the waves up around you, surrounding you. It had movement and emotion, and she looked down at the signature, June Flower Kino. It was impressive. Jordan turned to head toward the balcony doors, thinking to go out and stare at the ocean for a while. But then she remembered that the doors and the windows were monitored, and if someone went out, security would notify Mr. Kino. Sighing, she turned back toward the room. In the front corner was a window and a setting of two comfy-looking upholstered chairs and a small round coffee table in front. What was on the table caught her eye. It was a silver tray with two glasses and a fancy-looking bottle of something. Maybe whiskey or bourbon or rum or some kind of amber-colored liquid. She lifted it to examine it closely. There was a giant deer head with large antlers on the front. The label read, "The Dalmore Port Wood Reserve, Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey." The bottle was so pretty, it almost looked like a bottle of cologne rather than whiskey. She wondered if it was really whiskey or just for show, like with water and food coloring. It was already used, like about a third of it was gone. She twisted off the cap and smelled. Oh, it was definitely real. Then she got the idea that a glass of this stuff might take away the pain in her leg. So she sat down on one of the chairs and poured some of the whiskey into one of the glasses. Lifting it to her nose, she sniffed and made a face and took a tiny sip. It kind of burned as it went down. She sipped again, a larger one this time, and made a face, wondering how people could ever think that this stuff tasted good. But she was getting a nice warm feeling. She threw back the rest of what was in her glass and poured herself another, this time filling the glass. New scene. Young Eric woke with the 3 a.m. alarm he'd set to give Jordan another pain pill. He pulled on some jeans, grabbed up the bottle, and headed to her room. He stopped short when he saw she wasn't in bed or in the bathroom, and his heart started to beat faster. He ran down the stairs and searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Pulling out his phone, he checked with security to make sure no one had breached a door or window, and they assured him that no one had. He searched the lower level of the home, though he didn't think she'd brave a second flight of stairs. He researched the main level and went back upstairs and looked in her room again. He came out and looked down the hall and saw light coming from under the door on the left. Breathing a sigh of relief, he went down the hall, and as he got closer, he heard her singing, "I got friends in low places." He entered the room. What he found surprised him. "Hey, 3," Jordan said loudly when he came into the room. His brows rose. "Hello, Jordan." He put a finger to his lips. "What in the world are you doing?" She giggled. Singing." "Oh, is that what you call it?" "Yes. Yes, I do." She tilted her glass up and down what was in it. He took the glass from her hand. "And that is enough of that." He set the glass down and lifted the bottle. He wasn't sure how much had been in it. Jordan, how many glasses have you had of this stuff?" She laughed. "I'm not sure. 2, 3, maybe more, maybe less." He blew out a breath. "Babe, why are you in this room drinking whiskey?" She shrugged. I was in a lot of pain. I mean, a lot. And I was afraid to go downstairs to get my pain pills because, well, I can't get back up. So I decided to take a walk because I was restless. And look at what I found." He smiled. She smiled back. "I missed you, 3. You didn't come back to me." "Yes, I did, but you were sound asleep and I didn't want to wake you." "Oh," she said with a cute pout. "Well, I missed you and I felt all alone. I'm sorry." 3, she said with a bright smile. 3, would you like to make love to me?" He chuckled. "Yes, Jordan, yes, I would, but this is not the right time or place." He looked her over. She was sitting in one chair, her leg propped up on the other chair. He knelt down in front of her. "Let's get you back to bed." Will you sleep with me? She asked loudly. He put a finger to his lips. Shh, Jordan, you're going to wake Alec. She giggled. You know, Alec doesn't sleep in his own room. He sleeps with Desi. Eric smiled and nodded. Jordan sighed. Aren't they just the cutest? They're so in love. Yep, he agreed quickly, and he pulled Jordan to her feet. How much do you want to bet that he's told Desi, you are my destiny? You know, because, like, that's her real name. Young Eric chuckled. I bet he's said that many times. You could say that to me, but that wouldn't work for me because my name is not Destiny. You'd have to say, you are my Jordany. Mm, that doesn't make much sense at all, now does it? He gave a short laugh as he lifted her into his arms. You are my destiny for sure. No, I'm not. I'm your Jordany. Okay, you are my Jordany. She frowned. My name doesn't mean anything. Shh, let's not wake the house. And yes, it does. Your name is biblical. She laughed. Biblical? Biblical? What did you say? Biblical. From the Bible. Keep your voice down, please. I'm in the Bible, she whispered loudly. Yes, he said softly as he carried her down the hall and into her bedroom. What am I in the Bible? You're the river of life. You see, the Jordan River is where John the Baptist baptized Jesus. So, I'm your river of life? You are indeed. Well, right after Jesus, he said as he set her down on the bed. Be right back. He quickly went back to the room, closed up the whiskey bottle, grabbed up her crutches, turned off the light, and headed back to Jordan's room, just as there was a loud thump. He entered Jordan's bedroom and walked to the other side of the bed, and there was Jordan on the floor. Oh, honey, did you fall out of bed? She giggled. I suppose I did. He knelt down beside her. Are you hurt? I don't think I am. Eric? He rose at the sound of his father's voice. Yes, sir. Is everything okay? Yes, sir. Sorry we woke you. Jordan fell out of bed. Is she hurt? I don't think so. What's that smell? You're probably smelling the whiskey. You're drinking whiskey? Young Eric frowned. Really? He shook his head, bent down, picked Jordan up, and put her back in bed. She looked over at the person standing in the doorway. Oh, hey, Mr. Keno. How nice for you to come visit. Ricky's lips twitched. Well, hello there, Jordan. So, you decided to tie one on, huh? She was in pain and found a bottle of whiskey in the gray room. Ricky smiled. That bottle of whiskey has been there at least a year. Toby and Caroline received it as a gift from some fan when they were here, and they left it behind. Your mom saved it because she thought the bottle was so, cute, I think was her word. Oh, it is cute, Jordan said. It has like this big deer on it, and it's like kind of round and stuff. Ricky nodded. Yep, round and stuff. Now I understand. He looked at Eric. I thought you brought her pain pills up with you so you could give her one. I did, and I set my alarm to give her one at 3, but apparently she woke up earlier in pain and went exploring. Mr. Keno, did you know that I am bilical? He grinned. Bilical? Do you mean biblical? That's what I said, she said with a pout. Okay, I'll bite. How are you biblical? I'll give you a teeny weeny hint. Okay. It's my name. Ricky smiled. Ah, you are the Jordan River, the river of life, born again. That's right. Oh my gosh, you are all so smart, she said loudly. Both Ricky and Eric chuckled. So, you think she's not hurt? Ricky asked. Young Eric shrugged. I mean, she's wasted, so it's hard to tell. Ricky smiled. Hard to tell when she's not registering pain. I guess we'll know by morning. Ricky nodded at Eric. Well, son, this has been entertaining, but I'm going to go back to bed. You got this? Yes, sir. Try to get some rest. You got a spar tomorrow. I will. Night, Dad. Good night, son. He left and closed the door. Jordan sighed softly. Your dad is so nice. Yes, he is. My dad is dead. He sighed. I know. I'm sorry. He ran his hand over her hair. So, are you sure you're not hurt? She shrugged. I don't think so. He looked her over. I just noticed that Jeffy took the bandages off your arms. She smiled and held her arms out. He lifted one to look closely at it. It was covered in scratches and abrasions, but already looked to be healing. It looks better, he finally said. She nodded and then quickly pulled her shirt over her head. Whoa, babe, what are you doing? I want to show you all my boo-boos. He drew a patient breath. She put her hand on her neck. Just look at all this on my neck and my chest. Those aren't just scratches, 3. Those are his handprints on my neck, and this is from his fingernails clawing at me. He forced his eyes to move from the pink lacy bra to the claw marks on her chest and neck, and then lower to more claw marks on her stomach. She started to pull her sweats off. Wait, now what are you doing? I want to show you my knee. We'll look at that one later, okay? She shrugged. Okay. He noticed a bruise on the back of her shoulder. Lean forward. I want to look at your back. She bent over. Good grief, he muttered. You have dozens of little small bruises all over your back. Oh, yeah, that. I can't feel them. Dr. Kino says it's from the sharp rocks I was lying on when he was choking me. He ran his hand gently over her back. Baby, I'm so sorry. 3, she said softly, looking up into his eyes. He's going to get out, isn't he? What? No, absolutely not. The detective said there's a possibility, she said as her eyes filled. I heard what the detective said. They also said bail would be at least $500,000. I doubt he'll be able to make bail. He doesn't have any money. He was at school on student loans and he has no resources. Well, then why do I feel so scared? Don't be afraid, Jordan. She started to cry. I can't help it. I'm so afraid. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep worrying that someone is going to get me. I thought all of that was over, and now here I am again. You are not in the same place. I'm the only one of his victims who saw his face, the only one that can identify him. Wrong. I mean, you're the only one that saw his face, yes, but the others have DNA samples that identify him. Even without your testimony, he's going down. Please don't leave me, 3. Please just stay with me forever. I'm so scared. Okay, Jordan, now listen. Some of this is just the alcohol talking. So having this discussion right now is futile. You're not thinking clearly. I will tell you this. I absolutely intend to stay with you forever. Forever. But there will be times that I can't be at your side. When she continued to cry, he realized he was getting nowhere, so instead he helped her put her shirt back on, elevated her foot, covered her up, pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table, turned off the light, unbuttoned his jeans, and got into bed beside her. Then he pulled her close and looked into her eyes. I've got you, babe. She sniffed and blinked up at him. He lowered his head and kissed her softly, several times. Will you make love to me? She asked. He chuckled. And we're back to that, he muttered. What did you say? He sighed. Nothing, baby. Go to sleep. She cuddled up as close as she could get and obeyed. New scene. It's October 30th. It's Wednesday morning, South Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Young Eric hurried up the stairs with a small personal cooler and 3 bottles of cold water. As soon as he got into Jordan's room, he heard her retching in the bathroom. Setting the cooler down next to her side of the bed, he glanced into the bathroom and saw her on her knees in front of the toilet, and she just looked pitiful. He headed in and immediately gathered her hair back away from her face. Placing his hand on her back for support, he murmured comforting words that he was sure weren't helping a bit. When she finished, she lay down on the floor in front of the toilet in the fetal position and simply moaned. He brushed his hand over the side of her head. Don't say anything, she mumbled. He chuckled. I wasn't going to say a thing, but I do want to ask a question. She only moaned in response. Was it worth it? Shut up, she ordered, with no force behind the word. He bit his lip to keep from laughing. Jordan, I'm gonna just lift you up so you can stand. I want you to rinse your mouth, brush your teeth, wash the parts of your face that you're allowed to wash, and get back into bed. I've brought you a cooler of water because you need to hydrate, and I'm going back down to get the tea. That really yucky tea? She asked in a whisper. Yep, that's the one. It doesn't taste great, but you know it helps a whole lot. And Dad said he'll put extra honey in it. She sighed. He took her under her arms and lifted her to her feet, then lifted her again and moved her to the sink. There, get to it. I'll be right back. Jordan did as she'd been asked to do and was just making her way to the bed when young Eric came back into the room carrying a mug of tea. He set the tea down on the bedside table, smiled kindly at his girl, and helped her get comfortable in the bed, her back against the headboard so that she could sit up. Then he handed her the tea. Sighing, she accepted it, smelled it, made a face, which made him smile, and finally she took a sip. He watched her for a few minutes, and she looked up at him. What? She said. He shook his head. What? I'm just watching you. And thinking what an idiot I am? Nope. I'm thinking how much I love you and how our life together is not going to be boring at all. Our life together? I guess I'm moving too fast in my head. She smiled. Okay, well, I have to go. She nodded. He moved close and bent over and kissed her. Try to have a good day. You too. Oh, my day is going to be great. I'm sparring today. It might be the last sparring day before the challenge. Well, I guess I should say kick butt, 3. He grinned. Thanks, my little river. She giggled. You remember that? He asked. Unfortunately, I remember every stupid thing I said. Eric stopped and pulled his phone from his pocket. When he got a text, he read it and looked up with a smile. Granddad wants to know if you'll agree to come to the studio and have lunch and a counseling session with him today. He says you can stay and watch the sparring. She smiled a beautiful smile. I would love to do that. Good, but I don't want you driving. I'm sure Mom will bring you, but if not, I'll get an agent. Just be sure to drink that tea and hydrate. See you at lunch. He kissed her again. New scene, the same day, Kino Martial Arts, Newport, California. Grandmaster Kino looked Jordan over as she came into the studio on crutches. Her face was scabbing over on her forehead, nose, chin, and cheeks, and a few scabs on her neck, more on her arms. He shook his head. He'd seen the pics. He'd seen the video, but her appearance was still shocking. He watched her face light up, though, as young Eric came to greet her. She looked up at his grandson with adoring eyes, with complete trust. She smiled at the young man as if she hadn't seen him in weeks. He took her hands, brought them to his mouth, and kissed her fingertips, and he had the same adoring look in his eyes. Eric Sr. smiled. Those two were definitely in love, and it made him proud to see young Eric acting like a man, taking care of and protecting his girl. Eric had already spoken to his grandson about the guilt he was feeling for not being there for her when she needed him. Though it wasn't logical, young Eric still had to work his way through those feelings and thoughts of, if only I'd been there. But one can't live their lives in regret and what-ifs and if-onlys. These two kids had been through a lot lately. God was honing them into strong warriors. But today, after the dream he'd had last night, and from what Ricky said this morning, Jordan needed some help, and Eric was happy to provide that help. He was happy he was still here to serve his family and the world in any way God would have him serve. Eric smiled compassionately at Jordan as he approached her. She smiled at him politely. Hey, Grandmaster Kino, it's nice to see you, sir. It's good to see you too, Jordan. Thank you for making time for me and also for, reaching out to me for this meeting. I mean, you always go above and beyond. He smiled. I initiated the meeting because I tried to do what God asked me to do, and he gave me a dream last night about you. He loves you, and he wants me to help you. Jordan smiled. Wow, so he knows who I am? He does. He's like real, isn't he? Young Eric smiled at her words. Eric Sr. also smiled. He is indeed. But what you just said, there are so many things to talk about what you just said. Let's grab some lunch and go into the conference room. We need to get to it because I only have an hour. She nodded and they turned toward the table. Young Eric grabbed 2 plates and loaded them with paper wrapped sub sandwiches, quinoa chips, and a tangerine. Anything else you guys want? He asked. No, that's plenty, Jordan said. Granddad? What she said, he replied as he grabbed up a couple bottles of cold water and some napkins. Young Eric carried their plates for them into the conference room and set them at a table. If you need anything else, call me, young Eric said as he kissed Jordan's cheek and left them. Eric Sr. smiled at Jordan. Would you like to say the blessing? She shook her head. No, I want you to say it. He nodded, bowed his head, and blessed the food. He added a blessing on their counseling session and on Jordan herself. They unwrapped their sandwiches and took a bite, and Eric watched her silently for a moment or two. So let me go back to what you said a few minutes ago, he began. You seem surprised that our Father in heaven knows who you are, that he knows about you. She nodded. I mean, like, there are billions of people on the earth, right? And there are billions who have already died since the beginning of time, and I'm just one little person. How in the world could he even know I exist? Eric nodded. It's hard to wrap your brain around it, isn't it? How could he know each of us? Well, he knows each and every one of his own children. He's omniscient. He created everything. How he did that, we don't understand yet. We have a veil over our minds in this world, but that veil gets thinner as we develop a real relationship with him through prayer and listening, and more prayer and more listening, and don't leave out obedience to his laws and commandments. When she frowned, he went on. Sometimes it helps to understand if we compare God's kingdom to our own little kingdoms here on earth. What do you mean, our own little kingdoms? I have no kingdom, she said with a laugh. Yes, you do. Well, sort of. You see, what we have here is like a mini replica. There was Adam and Eve. They created a family, and so forth through the ages, all the way down to our family. There was Anne and I. She's my first wife. Jordan nodded because she knew of Anne. And now there's Shelley and I, and we have Ricky and Bree, and Mark and Joey and Jeffy. And they all married and created young Eric and Taylor and JoJo and Em, and Fia and Kel and Ledger. And Mark adopted Logan into his kingdom, and each of our children brought wives or husbands into the family. And Shelley and I now have 5 more lovely, amazing spirits, Nate, Noah, Abe, Angelina, and Manny. Do I remember every single one of these people? Well, yes, of course. I do. And I know them each personally, and I have a relationship with each of them. They are my little kingdom, my replica of God's universe. When I was younger, I provided these people with a home, but then they ventured out into the world and began to create their own world, their own homes, their own little kingdoms, yet still, they all belong to me. I care for them all. I won't forget them. And if they ever need me, I'll be there for them. The only way I wouldn't is if they turned their backs on me and didn't want me in their lives anymore, which would make me very sad. And I love them so much, I would do anything to help them. So, do you see how we can sort of begin to understand how God can love each and every one of us? Jordan nodded. Eric went on. So, not only does God know who you are, but he loves you. He wants you to have a relationship with him. And when you start to pray and listen and pray and listen, you will begin to hear his voice. And Jordan, he has heard you pray because he gave me a dream about you. He sent me to you to help you. And I love doing God's work, whatever he wants me to do. And talking to you, helping you is a really awesome job because I love you too. She smiled and looked down. Now, when you said earlier, he's real, isn't he? I'm curious. Why did you say that? Well, because I thought I heard something last night. I mean, Jesus spoke to me when the guy was choking me. Not last night, but that night. I mean, Jesus spoke to me. Eric nodded and smiled. Really? What did he say? He said, not yet. Okay, so do you remember what you were thinking about when he said that? She nodded. Yes, I was thinking that I'm going to die and I'm about to meet Jesus. Eric smiled, and he told you, not yet. Ah, Jordan, that is a beautiful thing. That means he was right there with you as that was happening to you. He was letting you know that you won't die, and that's usually because you have more work to do in this world before God calls you home. She blinked up at him. So let's think a minute about why God would allow you, one of his children, to be attacked like that. She was quiet as she took another bite of her sandwich, and finally she looked up at Grandmaster Kino. Oh, are you asking me, or are you going to tell me the answer to that? He chuckled. Well, I could tell you the answer, but I think you know it, so I'd rather you tell me. She shook her head as she thought, then suddenly looked up. I told my friends yesterday that I was glad it was me and not them. He nodded. You're on the right track. Go on. So, because it was me, and there were cameras around, he got caught. Keep going. And if not for me, he wouldn't have been caught, and he'd still be hurting more girls and ruining their lives, and maybe even killing them because he lost control and almost killed me, so he maybe could have done that, lost control, and killed them. And so? And so I'm glad it was me and not like Colton. You're still missing the point. She blew out a breath. You, Jordan, fought valiantly with a violent criminal. You took a beating, yes, but it's because of you being where you were that got this guy caught. Sometimes it seems like there's no good reason for something bad to happen to us. We don't deserve this, we think, but it has nothing to do with what we deserve. It's all for a reason. Maybe if it had been Colton and not you, maybe he would have killed her. But you're a warrior. You fought hard, and you kept him there so that the cameras picked up his image perfectly. So you're saying God used me to catch the guy? But why couldn't he just wave his arm and... She stopped and smiled, remembering she'd used those words before. She nodded. He did wave his arm, right? He waved it, and I lived, and the bad guy got caught, and those people came by and scared him off at just the right time. God could wave his arm and make it easier, but what good would that do? We don't get strong if it's easy, right? Eric couldn't contain his joy and smiled at the beautiful girl. Right. Very good, Jordan. And God chose you because you are one of his warriors. He chose you to do this hard thing because he uses his warriors to do hard things. We all have a plan for our lives, a purpose. What is my purpose? Your purpose, God's will for you, his plan for you, is between you and him, and you have to discover that for yourself. Still, he gave me a dream last night, and I absolutely know that you are one of God's chosen warriors. Well, may I ask you to tell me what you dreamed, or is it too personal? He smiled. I was wondering if you were ever going to ask. She shrugged. Well, sometimes I'm a little slow. I think more like too polite. I saw you, first, in a suit of armor. Then that morphed into you sitting with a baby, and you had a head covering, like one always sees on the Virgin Mary. And then I saw you much like you are now, all scratched up and battle-weary. And then I saw you heal. And then I saw you scratched up again. It went back and forth several times. Next, I saw you standing in front of a long line of girls, some young, some older. They came to you where you stood by a gate, and you allowed them to come in the gate, and then you closed it soundly. It made a big boom when you closed it. But then you morphed back into looking exactly like you look right now, only you were running away, looking back over your shoulder like someone was chasing you. He sighed. When I woke from the dream, I knew immediately what the problem was, and I knew God showed me that dream to have me help you with the problem. Okay, so what's my problem? He smiled. Not so fast, young lady. Let's go through the whole dream. First, you in the armor. That seems fairly obvious to me. As I've already said, you are one of God's warriors. He needs you to be a warrior. He needs you to fight for others. He needs you to put on the whole armor of God on a daily basis. She sighed. I really don't know how to fight. Well, if you're speaking of physically fighting, you've become a member of a family that definitely knows how to fight and could easily teach you if you want to learn. But that's not necessarily the kind of fight I'm speaking of. You've been fighting a long time now. You've been fighting since your father died and your mother married Perez. You fought like a champ when you were 14, and you've been doing it ever since. You fought to protect your siblings. You fought to get that scholarship. You've been fighting to keep that scholarship. Maybe I'm tired of fighting. Eric nodded. That's understandable. So God sent you rest in the form of a strong young man who can fight for you. Jordan smiled, thinking of that young man, and her heart swelled to overflowing. Her eyes moistened. Eric smiled at her. I'm sorry, she said, wiping at her eyes. I just love him so much. I know you do. It's quite evident. He picked up his phone and glanced at the time. We'd better get back to the dream before we run out of time. The next part, the baby and the headscarf, means you are a nurturer, a mother figure. Me? He smiled. It's clear even in what you said to your friends. You were glad it was you and not them. That's how a mother would think. Loving and protective. And then I saw you all banged up and healed and banged up and healed, and I think that means you have many battles to fight. Oh, great, she muttered. Eric chuckled. God wouldn't give you anything that you can't handle. So, do you go forth dreading each day, or do you cheerfully pick up your cross and carry the burden? Do you tell God, please, no more work for me, or do you tell him, bring it on? She nodded. I buck up and I tell him to bring it on. That's because you're a warrior. It comes naturally to you. He paused and went on. Next, standing at the gate with a long line of girls and women you were ushering inside. My interpretation of that is you were offering them sanctuary. You were putting them safely inside the gate and guarding the gate. You were protecting them. This might not be exactly what God meant. You should pray about it. But I think it's pretty close. Jordan nodded. And then the last part of the dream, you were running in fear, looking behind you in terror. That also seems pretty obvious to me. You're afraid. So tell me, Jordan, what are you afraid of? She looked down, thinking, oh, when I learned that this guy might get out on bail, it terrified me. With Peter, I was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if he would get to me. And then it seemed like the same thing was happening with this rapist guy. Eric nodded. It seemed like the same thing was happening, and it triggered the fear. But Jordan, it's not the same at all. First, I'm almost positive that he won't be getting out on bail because it's set at $2 million. But let's say somehow he finds the money and gets out. He'd have to wear an ankle monitor. Even then, we wouldn't depend on the state to do their job properly. We'd have an agent monitor him 24/7, and we'd have an agent with you 24/7. We won't let him get to you. But Jordan, he's not getting out. Justin is monitoring the situation. Garrett Clark is sitting in jail and will remain there until trial. Jordan nodded. That's his name? Gosh, I think he's in a few of my classes. Evil is everywhere. Will I have to testify? Yes. If you want to make sure he stays behind bars for the rest of his life. Does that upset you? She sighed. I guess not. Three said my testimony wasn't the only one. He said even without my testimony, they still had DNA evidence from all the other rapes. He's right. But I'm sure what he was trying to tell you was there would be no reason for this Clark kid to come after you to silence you because it wouldn't help him. He's finished, and that's because of you, Jordan. I'm thinking maybe you should meet up with the other victims because they're struggling, and I bet you could help pull them out of their funk. She nodded. I could do that. I'd like to be able to help them. If you'd like, I'll arrange it. Jordan nodded. Yes, that would be good, but I won't know what to say. You just say what's in your heart. Help them to be strong, just like you are being strong. Okay, I can do that. I know you can. I'm so proud of you. He closed his eyes briefly and nodded his head, then smiled at the beautiful young lady. Jordan, because you're one of God's warriors, apparently a very important, a very special one, God is nudging me to help you get stronger so that you will feel no fear. You have to be strong, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. When your foot heals, I'd like you to train. We can rehab you for softball and then go above and beyond and train you. You mean like what 3 does? I could never do that. Eric smiled. No, you can't, as long as you think that. But ask my wife if you can be trained to be the very best. Because she was a mart champion, right? Right, and I trained her. And when I first started training her, she'd never sparred in a tournament. A year later, she won the mart. I won't be training you for the mart, just to make you strong and confident. But no pressure, Jordan. This is only if you want me to. She nodded. But there is pressure, sir. I mean, if I told someone that Grandmaster Kino of Kino Martial Arts, father of Ricky Kino, offered to train me personally and I turned him down, I'd never hear the end of it. Especially from my own little brother, not to mention the guy I'm in love with. Eric smiled. Well, if you turn me down, I guess that's a cross you'd have to bear. Just know that I would have no ill feelings about you turning me down. I understand your trepidation. She nodded. It would be awesome to get strong and to feel confident instead of how I feel right now. How do you feel right now? Scared? Weak? Like I don't want to be alone? Like I want 3 to be with me at all times? Like I'm scared of my own shadow and like I'm going to jump out of my skin? But I'm trying to not show that to people because, like, she chuckled, I've always hated crying, weepy, weak, simpering females who can't stand on their own 2 feet. And now here I am, being just that. Well, don't be too hard on yourself. You were brutally attacked less than 48 hours ago. It usually takes some time to overcome the emotions that rise up after something like that. I predict that even a week from now, you won't feel so weak or afraid. You'll start to regain your confidence, and also, being in that cast, unable to walk, makes you feel vulnerable. You'll feel a lot better once your foot heals. She smiled. I hope so. Now, just one more thing about softball. Ricky says you haven't lost your scholarship yet. The coaches are going to allow you to recover and see if you can get back to the star pitcher you were. Jeffy and I will be happy to help you rehab, but you also will have to keep up your studies, and I know you've missed classes this week. So, get your head on straight, get focused, and let's get you all caught up. And you have a new assignment, a new agent assigned to you to get you to all of your classes, Agent Wyatt. She frowned. Eric smiled. We know you've grown attached to Agent Trout, but he's been promoted to senior lead agent and has other duties. But Agent Wyatt is a good man. She nodded. I know him. He watched over Josie and Jamie. She sighed. I'm sorry I'm costing you guys so much money having to pay for these agents. Eric frowned. We take care of our own. The money is nothing. A simple tool God has given to us to do his good works. They looked up at the knock on the door, and young Eric poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but like some people here are chomping at the bit to kick my butt, and it's 1:15. Oh, sorry, Eric. We're on our way right now, he said as he rose, as did Jordan. You are going to set these people down, correct? Young Eric grinned. Oh, absolutely. Let's do this. And that is the end of chapter 10.